Amen. James, thank you. And also, thank you for mentioning the rain because we did, at least our region, finished 2022 in a drought, anywhere from 9 to 10 inches short. And the lakes are showing it. And so, I mean, we're not in trouble or anything like that. But everybody, the fuller, the higher the lakes, the happier everybody is. So let's continue to pray for rain. And the hopeful sign is that the La Nina pattern, which basically means we don't get very much rain, that's kind of fading out. And so it doesn't mean that the rains will start tomorrow necessarily, but it does mean that when one pattern goes away, another one starts emerging. That's the El Nino. So hopefully El Nino and what some meteorologists sometimes refer to as La Nada, which is no rain at all. So hopefully we won't have to worry about that. Anyway, welcome to everybody here in the auditorium and also those who are watching online. We are continuing our study of the book of First Samuel. In fact, we're kind of halfway. We're very at a very critical point because we just went through a very exciting little episode where David kills Goliath, and something that on human terms was just about a physical impossibility. But of course, we know that David was not working with strictly uh, physical attributes. He had God on his side, and of course, God had a great deal to do with that. So, and this at the end of the chapter looks like, hey, this has cemented the relationship between David and King Saul, who benefited greatly by having Goliath vanquished. And uh, who also has had David as part of his retinue, although he really didn't know David all that well, because David was coming and going between Saul's palace and the family sheep back around back up in the Bethlehem area, and so he was coming and going. He has been anointed king. He is the individual that God says, "This is a man after my own heart." But remember that God works on His own timing, and for now, He's elected to keep Saul in place, and so David is kind of coming and going, doing what he needs to do, and so forth. But the encounter with Goliath changes all that, and suddenly Saul, who for whom David was just one of many people, tending to him and taking care of him. Uh, Not quite sure who that young man is, but suddenly it says, "Tell me a little bit more about this man," especially since part of the bargain of killing Goliath is that David now has the opportunity to become the king's son-in-law because he's Saul as part of the package. If you kill Goliath, you get my daughter as your wife. You get to become part of royalty. So tell me a little bit more. Yeah, tell me a little bit more about this man who just killed Goliath, or this young boy. And so that's where we are as we pick up chapter 18. David is the hero of the hour, and suddenly he is item number one on everybody's mind, including Saul, including the king's family, including the king's firstborn son, the crown prince of Israel, Jonathan. And we begin reading in chapter 18. After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. Now we've already known a little bit about Jonathan, that he's a pretty good guy, and you pick up about Jonathan that he really is someone who follows God, wants to obey God, and at least considerably more so than his dad. And it's probably not all that surprising on a spiritual sense that he hooks up or he connects with David, because these two gentlemen apparently have the same kind of spiritual feeling, and which bonds them together. What is unusual about from a human standpoint is that by allying with David, Jonathan basically is acknowledging that, hey, even though I'm the crown prince, I'm not neither I nor anyone in my family is going to remain in any kind of royal position in the nation of Israel for very long. Uh, that could be a challenge for a lot of relationships. It's, and there have been relationships and friendships that have been corrupted, or they've ended badly, or they've just had been all sorts of problems because there were conflicts of interest. Yeah, he's a pretty good guy, but he's after the same thing I am, and I want this particular thing pretty badly. So, I see him as a rival, uh, as a frenemy, which is a word that has come into common use. A frenemy is someone, he's a friend, but he's also an enemy because you have a disagreement with him, or you two are gunning for the same thing. But that doesn't bother Jonathan. Uh, the writer in 1 Samuel says he became one in spirit with David. He loved him as himself. That's quite a great friendship, where you love someone like you would love yourself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family. Keep in mind that up to this point, David's kind of been coming and going. When he wasn't needed at the palace, he'd go back and tend the family sheep. That's a thing of the past here. He has been permanently drafted and incorporated into the king's household. And verse 3, Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Look at this. He took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Keep in mind, there's at the end of the lesson today, we're going to see something symbolic about attire and clothing. But these are the things that identify Jonathan as part of royalty, as part of the royal family. Not just any member of the royal family, he's the next in line. But even so, that doesn't matter to Jonathan. He removes these items of royalty and he gives them to David. And in effect, he is confirming what God has already said, that the kingship will go to David. And Jonathan, knowingly or not, or otherwise, basically makes a public show of that. We learn a little bit more about how things are going on between Saul and David. Whatever mission Saul sent him on, David was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. This pleased all the troops and Saul's officers as well. That's quite remarkable for someone who is young as David, because this is a young man who maybe at best is in his maybe early 20s. Maybe he could still be a teenager. And yet look at his standing in the army. He has a rank that men twice his age may not have. And that could arouse a great degree of jealousy and rivalry and bitterness, but not in this case, because David is very popular, has a lot of support. And as we're about to see here, verse 6, when the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs and with timbrels and lyres. They didn't have, consider the technology of the day. They didn't have streaming. They didn't have YouTube. They didn't have Spotify. They didn't have radio. They didn't even have cassette tapes or record players. But they did know how to make music, and that was for all the girls to come out and dance and sing with their timbrels and lyres, something part of the custom here. And not only that, as they danced, they sang, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Ooh. And as it turns out, as we're about to find out, this is going to be a very, very popular song. Old Casey Kasem's going to include that on, the Israelite Top 40. It's part of his long distance dedications. Man, time after time after time on heavy rotation, as they would say in the radio business. they would, you'd hear this song like every couple of hours. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands, time after time after time. And eventually it gets to old Saul here, verse 8. Saul was very angry, not just a tad miffed. This really was eating at him. This refrain displeased him greatly. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. Man, I'm going to fire my PR agent. No, he didn't say that. He has something else in mind. What more can he get but the kingdom? Okay, up to this point, Saul knows what's going to happen long term. He's not going to be king forever. Samuel's already laid it down on him. This is the Lord has told me this twice, and it's definite. It's in place now. He's going to tear the kingdom from you, and he's going to give it to a man after his own heart. So Saul knows there's somebody out there, doesn't know the timeline, and up to this point, he doesn't even know who the person is. Now he's starting to figure out it's this guy. This guy who plays the harp, this guy who's been part of the team, this guy who went out, who's been very successful in battle, this guy who slayed Goliath. And from that time on, verse 9, Saul kept a close eye on David. And with everything that's going on in Saul's head, because remember, one of the things that's going on here is that Saul knows of God, but Saul doesn't really know God. In fact, Saul has either accidentally or on purpose, he has stiff-armed God. He's kept him at a distance. He's kept him out of his life. Basically, all this religious stuff, Samuel, you go handle that, and I'll take care of everything else. And it's that decision has had an effect on Saul's life and how he lives it. And it doesn't take long after he realizes that there's a potential rivalry in David for him to start doing something about it. Because verse 10 says, the next day, an evil spirit from God. I don't think God creates and sends evil spirits. What this may mean is now that God has made the decision to give the kingship to somebody else, he has removed his spiritual protection from Saul. Spiritual protection that otherwise would protect him from all sorts of spiritual influences. That's gone. That's gone away. And so there is this evil, or as another translation is, a harmful spirit, and it certainly is at least harmful, this spirit to come in and start aggravating Saul. The next day, an evil spirit from God came forcefully on Saul. He was prophesying in his house, prophesying now in the original Hebrew, a little imprecise. It's quite possible that Saul was actually saying prophetic words sent to him by God. But if you read the Hebrew, it might also mean Saul was sitting there babbling, talking nonsense. Of course, this upsets the court. Gee, there he goes again. I really feel uncomfortable when he's sitting around mumbling to himself like that. You better get David in here. Get him with his lyre. Calm him down. Play a little soothing music. So that's what they do. David's in Saul's presence playing the lyre as he usually did. Saul had a spear in his hand, and he hurled it, saying to himself, I'll pin David to the wall. Well, good thing for David, Saul's aim is very bad. Either that or God redirects the trajectory there. He misses David. David eludes him. Not once, but twice. Once would have been enough for me and probably for most of us here. Like, hey, if somebody throws a spear at me, or aims any kind of a weapon at me and misses, my first thought is, I'm out of here. David basically plays it cool. And so, because this little episode happens not once, but twice, and David puts up with it. What's going on here? Verse 12, writer explains Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David, but had departed from Saul. That's why a lot of bad things are about to happen to Saul. That's why Saul is going to make some very, very bad choices coming up. But, verse 13, Saul sent David away from him and gave him command over 1,000 men, and David led the troops in their campaigns. Saul may be thinking, well, I just, out of sight, out of mind, I don't want to have to worry about him right now. Send him to fight the Philistines. Well, in verse 14, in everything David did, he had great success because the Lord was with him. When Saul saw how successful he was, say that 3 times rapidly. When Saul saw how successful he was afraid of him. Or maybe in this case, he became even more afraid. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he led them in their campaigns. Note that phrase, Israel and Judah. This gives you an idea of something about the political divisions that had actually were in effect or developing at this point. There were essentially 2 political camps inside the nation of Israel. It was not necessarily a united nation, at least in terms of culture or politics. You had most of Israel, basically the hill country and everything to the north of Judah, which was called Israel, and then you had Judah itself, the land that was inhabited by the descendants of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, I believe. This is going to play a role in the history of Israel as time goes on, but make a note of that. It's not really important at this point. So, fear leads people to do and say and plan really crazy things. What is Saul doing? Saul plans to get rid of David. I mean, we saw him heave the spear at David. That may have been just an impulse. Now it really gets, Saul embarks on a systematic campaign to kill David, get rid of him, whatever he can, but keep his hands clean. This campaign against David has 3 particular phases. And we see phase 1, which is murder by proxy. Yeah, I'll get rid of David, but I'll have the Philistines do it. My hands will be clean. The Philistines will take this baby out, and you know what? Everybody will be sad. There will be a moment of sadness. I'll be sad. I'll even lead the funeral procession for David. But it'll be done. I'll be rid of David, and my hands will be clean. So, here's how he carries it out. Verse 17, Saul said to David, here is my older daughter Merab. I will give her to you in marriage. Hey, this was part of the deal because, this is something that David was already entitled to because he had killed Goliath. Only serve me bravely and fight the battles of the Lord. For Saul said to himself, I will not raise a hand against him. Let the Philistines do that. Here's David's response. Even though by right, he's entitled to this marriage relationship. He says, who am I? And what is my family or my clan in Israel that I should become the king's son-in-law? David's humility is blocking him from taking this young woman as his wife. He points out, hey, you guys are royalty. I'm the lowest of the low. We don't even qualify. Not only are we not in who's who, we don't even make what's what. We just, we're the lowest of the low in society. I really can't see myself doing that. So, verse 19, when the time came for Merab, Saul's daughter, to be given to David, she was given in marriage to Adriel of Meholah. Maybe that was the only thing Saul could do at that point. It might possibly be that Saul was working a little bit mischief here. Hey, I'm going to give her to another guy. Maybe I can stir up some trouble between the two of them. And in the ensuing fight, one will take out the other. But there's another daughter. Verse 20. Now Saul's daughter, Michal, was in love with David. And when they told Saul about it, he was pleased. I will give her to him, he thought, so that she may be a snare to him, and so that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. So Saul said to David, now you have a second opportunity to become my son-in-law. Then Saul ordered his attendants, speak to David privately and say, look, the king likes you, and his attendants all love you. Now become a son-in-law. And they repeated these words to David, but David said, do you think it is a small matter to become the king's son-in-law? I am only a poor man, and I'm little known. David's humility is basically putting the brakes on marrying into the king's family. When Saul's servants told him what David had said, Saul replied, no problem. Say to David, the king wants no other price for the bride than 100 Philistine foreskins to take revenge on his enemies. Yeah, no big deal. 100 Philistine foreskins. Gee, what could possibly go wrong with that? You know, it's not like David could stop by this healthcare clinic and say, do you have any used foreskin? And then that's just not going to work. The only way you get these foreskins is number one, because no one's going to volunteer to be circumcised. The only way you get them is to kill them. And for David, this puts him in double jeopardy, because first he has to kill the Philistine to get the foreskin. And then while he is, assuming he kills the Philistine while he's performing the surgery, there's always the danger that another Philistine will come up, see David, and say, you're desecrating the corpse of my buddy here. And that guy takes him out. So this is only one of the most dangerous things that Saul is requesting. And of course he says, he probably won't even get to 5 or 6 before they take him out. You know, victory is assured. It's a done deal. Well, yeah, it is a done deal, because two things. When the attendants told David these things, he was pleased to become the king's son-in-law. That may strike you as a little bit weird. Yeah, you're sending me into certain death, but hey, that's cool. David may be pleased because, hey, he's thinking, maybe this means Saul will quit chucking his spear at me. You know, it's, whatever he was upset with me about, that's all over with now. We're best buds again. All is good. And yeah, I can do this thing, and he did. So before the allotted time elapsed, interestingly enough, they don't say that there was a deadline here in the earlier narrative, but apparently there was this understanding, kind of a nod, wink, wink. Hey, you'll get this done by the end of the month, right? Or whatever, if you're serious about it. David goes out, undertakes the assignment. He took his men with him and went out and killed 200 Philistines and brought back their foreskins. They counted out the full number to the king. Oh, wow. I was about to say imagine that in that little scenario, but maybe you don't want to. But there he is. 1, 2, 3, 4. No thank you. But they count out the full number to the king so that David might become the king's son-in-law. Then Saul gave him his daughter Michal in marriage. At that point, Saul realizes two things, or he's reminded of two things. He realized that, number one, the Lord was with David. Number two, his daughter Michal loved David. This was more than just an arranged marriage. She really loved David, although there are, like any kind of human relationship, there are certain flaws to it that we're going to find out a little bit later on. But the way things are going, they're not going Saul's way. Verse 29, Saul became still more afraid of David And look at this. He remained his enemy the rest of his days. Now, forget about buddy. Forget about, oh, I'm so grateful for David. He's a valuable member of the household. He may say that publicly, but as far as Saul is concerned from this point on, David is the enemy. I'm going to get him before he gets me. The Philistine commanders continued to go out to battle, and as often as they did, David met with more success than the rest of Saul's officers, and his name became well known. Well, none of this is going Saul's way. So he's still out to murder David, but now it enters phase 2 as we go into chapter 19. Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David. Forget the Philistines, that aspect ain't working out at all. Jonathan, David's your rival. Take him out. But Jonathan had taken a great liking to David and warned him, my father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Go into hiding and stay there. I will go out and stand with my father in the field where you are. I'll speak to him about you and will tell you what I find out. This shows the character of Jonathan, because the opportunity was there for someone who was very politically motivated, even for someone who had pledged friendship with someone who had now become his main rival for the king's throne. It would have been so easy for a politically motivated person to say, yeah, well, that was then, this is now. Hey, my daddy tells him I gotta kill this guy, so I gotta kill him. Jonathan is not like that at all. He's true to his friend David, even warns him, don't turn your back on my dad. He's fixing to do something to you. Not only that, he confronts his dad. Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul his father and said to him, let not the king do wrong to his servant David. He has not wronged you, and what he has done has benefited you greatly. He took his life in his hands when he killed the Philistine, namely Goliath. The Lord won a great victory for all Israel, and you saw it and were glad. Why then would you do wrong to an innocent man like David by killing him for no reason? Well, he's got his dad dead to rights here. He's defined the issue. He's called his dad out on his bad behavior. Says, Daddy, you can't do this. Stop doing it. Saul listened to Jonathan and took this oath. As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death. So, Jonathan called David and told him the whole conversation. He brought him to Saul, and David was with Saul as before. And peace is back in the whole family, at least for the time being. We know it's kind of like a truce. Because with Saul's mindset the way it is, this ain't going to last. Something's going to happen sooner or later. Even when he takes an oath to God and says, no, David won't be put to death. Yeah, let's see how long that lasts. Not very long. Not once more, war broke out. David went out and fought the Philistines. He struck them with such force that they fled before him. But an evil spirit from the Lord came on Saul as he was sitting in his house with a spear in his hand, while David was playing the lyre, same as before. Saul tried to pin him to the wall with his spear, but David eluded him. How hard did Saul throw the spear? Hard enough to drive the spear into the wall. And the way this is written sounds like David literally escaped by the skin of his teeth. Very, very close call. Too close. That night, David made good his escape, and he never returned to the palace. David is now, for the rest of 1 Samuel, he is now on the run. And Saul is after him. Saul is making no pretense about what he wants to do with David. Saul sent men to David's house to watch it and to kill him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, warned him, "If you don't run for your life tonight, tomorrow you'll be killed. Don't think you're going to be safe here in your own house. They're going to come for you." So Michal let David down through a window, and he fled and escaped. Then Michal took an idol and laid it on the bed. Tells you a little bit something about the spiritual condition of Saul and his household. We know where Saul is, but apparently he was not a good, godly father. I mean, here he has children who have idols, something expressly forbidden by the law of Moses. But she has a household idol, and she takes it and she laid it on the bed, covering it with a garment and putting some goat's hair at the head. And impersonating David in his bed, asleep. When Saul sent the men to capture David, Michal said, "He's ill. I'm sorry, David can't come to the door right now. He's a little under the weather." They go back and report that to Saul. Saul sent the men back to David and told him. And here we enter into the third and final phase of Saul's plan to take out David, where basically he says, "I'll kill him myself. Bring him up to me in his bed so that I may kill him." But when the men entered, there was the idol in the bed, and at the head was some goat's hair. Saul's been had. They bring what they think is David on a gurney, and only it's not David. And Saul is really displeased. He says to his daughter, "Why did you deceive me like this and send my enemy away so that he escaped?" Michal told him, he said to me, "Let me get away. Why should I kill you?" A little bit of a lie. David had to be enlightened by his wife that, hey, it's not safe to stay here. But, anything works in a situation like this. And then we have this curious episode, beginning with verse 18. When David had fled and made his escape, he went to Samuel at Ramah, that's Samuel's hometown, his home base, and told him all that Saul had done to him. Then he and Samuel went to Naioth. Don't get thrown by that word or by that name. Naioth in the Hebrew means residence. And in this case, this would be specifically the residence of Samuel. So basically, they go back to Samuel's house, and they stayed there. Word came to Saul, David is at Naioth at Ramah. So he sent men to capture him. But when they saw a group of prophets prophesying, with Samuel standing there as their leader, the Spirit of God came on Saul's men, and they also prophesied. Saul was told about it, and he sent more men, and they prophesied too. Saul sent men a third time, and they also prophesied. Well, good grief, this is getting Saul nowhere. So he makes the decision, I'll go after him myself. Verse 22, finally, he himself left for Ramah and went to the great cistern at Seku, and he asked, where are Samuel and David? Over at Naioth at Ramah, they said. So Saul went to Naioth at Ramah, and something very, very strange happens. The Spirit of God came even on Saul, and he walked along prophesying, maybe doing actual prophecies provided by the Spirit of God. Maybe it's more babbling that nobody can understand. But he walked along prophesying until he came to Naioth, and there he stripped off his garments, and he too prophesied in Samuel's presence, just like the men, only Saul's doing it, underdressed at least. He lay naked all that day and all that night. Gee, what do you mean by naked, Mr. Hebrew writer? Well, two interpretations. Number one is naked's naked. Didn't even have the dignity of a fig leaf, Everybody's standing around going, how about those Cowboys? Yeah, think they'll make the playoffs? Yeah. Or, depending on how you want to interpret the Hebrew, naked means basically you're underdressed. Saul was in his undergarments, in the boxer shorts with the polka dots. it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, because basically what the writer is trying to convey is that Saul was divested of his royal garments, his armor, his weaponry. You probably can imagine what might be going through Saul's mind even as he's prophesying, and there he is taking off everything. And his head is telling him, I'm disrobing in public. And I'm but his body does it anyway because he's under the control of the Spirit of God. There's a reason why this is going on. Why Saul is being reduced to this very undignified manner. Two things. Number one is a little personal message between Saul and the Lord, where the Lord may very well have been saying to Saul, Saul, you have spent your entire career as king refusing to humble yourself before me. You've consistently done it. You've consistently refused to do it, even as I've given you opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to make things right and to approach me in a right relationship. Therefore, because you have refused to humble yourself before me, I am humbling you. The second is kind of a symbolism here that's being painted and being presented to anyone who's there and watching. Now, just as this man, this king of Israel, is divesting himself of his royal attire, he is also being divested of his status as king of Israel. I meant what I said when I said I'm ripping the kingship away from him and giving it to someone else. That's exactly what's happening now, and that's what's going to continue to happen as time goes on. Saul lay naked all that day and all that night. This is why people say, is Saul also among the prophets? Not the first time they had said that about Saul. There's a little episode back in chapter 10 where at the beginning of Saul's kingship, where he meets this band of prophets who are prophesying, and he joins in with them. Back then, that was a wondrous thing. That was a sign of God's approval and blessing. This time, this is a sign of God's judgment. Back then, people said, is Saul also among the prophets? That was probably said in great wonderment, like, hey, we have a special person here. Now, when they're saying it, you can probably imagine that they're saying it with a great deal of irony, probably sarcastically, along the lines of, there he goes again. What is he going to do next? Well, we're about to find out, because that ends chapter 19. We got, let's see, I think 12 chapters to go before we finish 1 Samuel. So if you would, please read the next couple of chapters. Unfortunately, this whole little episode will just play out bit by bit, piece by piece. Poor David is on the run, and it can get a little bit scary at times. The only thing at the end is to remember that at the end, God is with David, but not with Saul. So anyway, read those two chapters if you will, and Lord willing, that'll be our lesson for next Sunday. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I hope you enjoyed the lesson, got something out of it. Have a great week. Pray for rain, and we'll see you next Sunday.